welcome back to Crazy Dave's Kitchen, where today we're making a basil, olive, and sun-dried tomato bread. And I made this bread back in October, and I made one giant loaf, but this is actually a two-loaf recipe. So we're going to go through some ingredients here. In the mixer bowl, I have 3 teaspoons of dry active yeast, along with 1 teaspoon of sugar, and 2/3 cup of warm water, and that's been sitting for about 10 minutes, so it's all nice and foamy. So that's like a little starter. Then I've got 3½ cups of bread flour. I have 2 cups of all-purpose flour, and I have 1 cup of cornmeal, along with 3 teaspoons of kosher salt. There's sun-dried tomatoes, so there's 2/3 cup sun-dried tomatoes, and if they're in olive oil, you need to pat them dry, and if they're not, that's fine too. So just as long as they're not dried, like super dried, they still need to be moist, and so they sell some fresh moist ones at the store. There's also 3 tablespoons of fresh basil in this. And of course, there's 2/3 cup of Kalamata olives. Kalamata olives. There you go. See? I didn't even need to retake that. And then, of course, 2 cups of warm water, about 110 degrees, to be added to this. Now, so what we're going to do is we're going to add our flours and our cornmeal. When we add these other ingredients, we're going to have to mix those in by hand because it just doesn't work too well with the mixer before we move our dough. So let's just add our dry ingredients into the mixer. Let's put in our dough hook. And we're going to start this process right now. This is going to take about 8 to 10 minutes or so, so we'll just have to let this form a nice soft dough. Okay, so I did add about 1/8 cup of additional bread flour to this, just because it was taking a little bit to form. So sometimes with making bread, you do have to add a little bit more flour to make it all sort of come together. So here we are, we have our basic dough kind of pulling away a little bit. So now I'm going to go ahead and add our sun-dried tomatoes, our basil, getting as much as we can in there, and then of course our olives. And we're just going to mix this by hand into the dough right in the bowl here. It's going to be a little sloppy, a little messy, but it's the only way. If you just dump it into the dough and turn on the dough hook, it really doesn't do much. It just kind of spins it around a little bit. So we really just want to get in here and mix it as well as we can. And there we go, a nice blob of olives flying everywhere, along with sun-dried tomatoes. That's perfect. So I have a pre-oiled bowl here, and we're just going to coat this with oil, flip it over, make sure it's coated really nice. Grab whatever you can and stick it in the bread. We're going to cover this with plastic wrap for an hour and a half. And then after that, we'll form the loaves. Those are going to rest for another hour, and then we're going to bake it, and then we'll have delicious, delicious bread. Okay, so it's been 1½ hours that the dough was risen. I took it out of the bowl, and I formed it into 2 loaves. I also have 2 prepared baking sheets with some parchment paper, and a little bit of cornmeal sprinkled on the bottom, so it'll give it a nice crunch at the bottom of the loaf. So I just split it in half, formed it into a rough loaf. We're going to place one on each sheet, just like so. And then we're going to let this rise for about another hour. I'm going to kind of just push it into a loaf. We're going to take some cooking spray and put it on some plastic wrap and just lightly cover these for an hour or so before baking them in an oven at 400 degrees. So you can start to preheat your oven, and then once these are done, 40 minutes in the oven, and then we'll have delicious sun-dried tomato, basil, and olive bread. So here we go. Okay, so the dough had risen for an hour, and I baked the first bread, which you can see right here. It came out very nice, crispy, crunchy, olivey, and tomatoey with a hint of the basil, really nice. It's more of a thin bread, but it still works out very nice. When you finish these, you're going to just paint these with a little bit of olive oil on the top, and then pop it into the 400-degree oven for 40 minutes. And you're going to have two flat type loaves, but it's very delicious. A little bit of butter, a little white wine, and you'll be enjoying this really nice rustic olive, sun-dried tomato, and basil bread. Thanks again for tuning in to Crazy Dave's Kitchen, and we'll see you next time.